Welcome to our presentation on the changes to VAT, the domestic reverse charge that's impacting the construction industry scheme. My name's Sarah Leonard and I'm a director at Streets. The VAT domestic reverse charge comes into effect in March 2021. So subcontractors will no longer collect VAT that they charge their customers, and they will need to do some changes to their invoice layouts to support this. And the contractors will no longer pay this VAT to their subcontractors, and they will no longer claim this VAT back from HMRC. For some subcontractors, therefore, this might cause a short-term cash flow issue. And for some contractors, they're going to be left the unpleasant task of explaining why these changes have come into effect. And for our contractors, we're worried about aggravation and confusion that may occur when they're explaining this to their subcontractors, and making sure that they understand the timing issues that are going to impact them as well. The only situation where VAT between a subcontractor and a contractor won't fall under the domestic reverse charge is if your contractor is ultimately the end user. This is where perhaps they're building themselves, or they are in the offices. And there's some quite complex rules around this, especially if you're a landowner constructing the building yourself, but you're in excess of £1 million. And so therefore it's important that you understand if your contractor is deemed to be the end user or not. There's some excellent advice on this on the HMRC link, and I'll show you that at the end of the presentation. So what is going on? The reverse domestic charge removes the need for a CIS contractor to collect the VAT from their contractor customers. So the CIS subcontractor no longer needs to pay this VAT over to the revenue, but they still need to register for VAT if they meet the VAT threshold. So even though you're not collecting the VAT, it's important to make sure that if you breach the VAT threshold, you register for VAT. And the sales invoices, therefore, don't show the VAT on them anymore, but they do infer that there's VAT being charged. For the contractor, they need to record the invoice in their accounting system to show it both as an input and an output on their VAT return. This is where the term reverse charge comes from. And then as a CIS contractor, you no longer claim this VAT back from HMRC. So are there winners and are there losers in this situation? Ultimately, no. This is just about a cash flow feel and a short-term cash flow squeeze. But ultimately, there are no winners or losers. You would still end up with the same amount of money in your pocket at the end of this period of time. So for subcontractors, you no longer pay any VAT over to HMRC. The upside of this is that it's likely that your VAT returns might become refund returns. So instead of paying money to the revenue, you're likely to start claiming money back from the revenue on your VAT returns. The issue that you're going to feel is that when your customers pay you, there will be no VAT on that bill. And so for a period of time, for a period of adjusting, it's going to feel like less money comes in. And especially if you're reliant on that money coming in to perhaps purchase materials for the next job, you might notice this VAT, this cash flow squeeze. If you're a contractor, on the upside, you no longer pay VAT on your subcontractor bills. And so in the short term, this might actually feel like a cash flow gain, because instead of paying them their net plus the VAT, you're just paying them their net. This might mean that if you've got a number of VAT registered subcontractors, actually it's going to feel like your VAT returns have gone up. Now, your VAT returns haven't gone up. Again, it's a timing issue, but it's important that you understand how this might impact your cash flow. Everybody is going to have to do a bit more admin, initially at least, while we get used to the scheme. For the subcontractors, you're going to have to change how you prepare your invoices. And for the contractors, you need to know how to input those into your accounting system correctly. And if you're a contractor, it's likely the onus will fall on you to explain it to subcontractors who aren't aware of the changes to the scheme. To help with the cash flow side, subcontractors have a couple of things they might want to consider. One is that if your returns are likely to be refund returns, you could move to monthly returns rather than quarterly. But be aware, this is more admin, because instead of returning 4 returns a year to the revenue, you would now be submitting 12. And so you will need to decide if that's an administration burden that you're happy to undertake in order to get your cash refunds quicker. The other thing you might want to consider is whether you have the option to move up to gross status for CIS. So if you're under the net scheme and currently your contractor withholds CIS at source before they pay you, you can consider moving to gross status. You need to apply for this, but if you're eligible, then this would mean that more of that money turns up in your pocket when you get paid. The thing you have to remember with this, though, is that the current scheme under net is that they're withholding future tax that you then don't have to pay on your tax returns. If you move to gross status, then obviously no one's withholding any tax as you work, and therefore your tax return bills are likely to feel higher. So let's work through a basic example. This time, just looking at someone who is under gross status for CIS, so a very simplified example. A subcontractor raises an invoice for £1,000. They show that there's VAT due on this invoice, but they don't actually add the VAT on. So you would infer that there's a 20% VAT charge, but you don't add the £200 onto the actual invoice. The contractor then pays the subby £1,000. The contractor then shows £200, the VAT that would have been payable on that invoice, in box 4, but under the reverse charge, they also show it on box 1 of their VAT return. The net impact means that no VAT is payable or claimable with the revenue. It's a nil impact on their VAT returns. So there's no gain to the contractor for this. And then the subcontractor no longer needs to pay the revenue £200 VAT at the end of their quarter. So to compare before and after, on the current scheme, you would invoice £1,000. You would also invoice for the £200 VAT. You would receive the £1,200 and then you would pay £200 to the revenue on your VAT return. So you would end up with £1,000. The situation now is that you would invoice for £1,000. The contractor would pay you £1,000. You've got no VAT to pay and you still end up with your same £1,000. If you're under net status, so let's assume a 20% net status. So the contractor withholds 20% of your pay before they pay you your invoice. So you would raise your same invoice for £1,000 plus VAT. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to assume the invoice is just for labour, so it's all labour. So what would happen now? Your contractor would pay you 80% of the invoice, so they would pay you £800, so £1,000 less a 20% CIS deduction. And then they would also pay you the VAT. So they would pay you £1,000. And then at a point in the future, you would have to pay that £200 over the revenue, meaning you're left with £800 in your pocket. Under the new system, you would raise an invoice for £1,000. There's no VAT showing. There's no VAT payable. Your contractor would just withhold the 20%, so they would pay you £800. You've got no VAT to pay to the revenue. And again, you're just left with your £800 in your pocket. So there is no difference to the amount of money you're ultimately left with, but there is a timing difference with the VAT. One of the easiest ways to work out whether you need to apply this domestic reverse charge is to use this flow chart that we've created. Look at it first of all with a subcontractor hat on. And I know for some businesses, they sit with both hats on as a subcontractor and a contractor. So do I need to apply the domestic reverse charge rules if I'm a subby? So first of all, is the work you're doing, does it fall under the definition of CIS? If not, you would just charge VAT as normal. Is the work you're providing VATable, either at standard or a reduced rate? If the answer is no, then the standard rules apply. Otherwise, we move down the chart. This is the important change. We need to know if your customer is VAT registered. Now, normally, you don't even consider this. You raise your bill, you charge your VAT, and you don't worry about whether your customer can recharge the VAT. But the domestic reverse charge only applies between a subcontractor and a contractor that are both VAT registered. Therefore, this is something new and you'll need to find this out. If they're not VAT registered, normal rules apply. You would charge VAT as normal. If they are VAT registered, we then need to make sure we are definitely operating within the CIS scheme. So they are a contractor as far as CIS is concerned, and you'll need to know their details to confirm that and keep evidence of that. Finally, you need to consider if the work you're doing for them puts them in the position of being an end user. So are they the end user? If they are the end user, normal VAT rules apply. You charge VAT as normal. It's only where they're not an end user, we then are in the situation of applying the domestic reverse charge. Flipping this over now and thinking about us as a contractor, we work down the same flow chart. Are you VAT registered? If you're not VAT registered, then this whole thing doesn't apply to you at all. You can stop watching now. Are you registered as a contractor for CIS? So if you're not a contractor, this doesn't apply to you at all. This is only for VAT registered contractors in the CIS scheme. So the next question is the work that your subcontractor doing for you, is it VATable at either standard or reduced rates? If it's not VATable, you treat it as a normal invoice. This is only for VATable invoices. Is the work they're doing for you under the scope of CIS? So this would be a normal operating relationship that you would have with them as a subby, and they're not doing something for you that falls outside the scope. So it needs to be CIS work from a CIS VAT registered subcontractor. You need to make sure you're aware if you are an end user. If you are an end user, then you will need to apply normal rules, and this doesn't apply. This is only where you are then operating as a contractor for someone else. And if this is the case, then the domestic reverse charge applies. So what actually needs to change? Well, the paperwork change all happens for the subcontractor. So let's have a look at an example invoice, a very simplified example invoice. So we've just got a basic invoice here, charging VAT over to our customer. So the first thing we need to note is we have to show the VAT rate on the invoice. So we need to say if we're charging at 20% or a reduced rate, say of 5% on the invoice that we're sending over. We need to tell our customer that we are applying the reverse charge. Now, there is no fixed statutory text that you have to use on your invoice. We show an example here, and there's some good examples on the revenue guidance, which I'll point you to at the end of the presentation. But you need to put something on the bottom of your invoice inferring that this is taking place, that this domestic reverse charge is taking place. If you're using accounting software, then this will automatically populate for you. And so the easiest way to make sure you're compliant is if the invoice you're raising meets the criteria for domestic reverse charge. So looking at the flowchart we've just used, if it needs to apply, then on your software, you need to pick the appropriate tax rate or T code to make this happen. So in Sage, we're looking at a T21 tax code, T code. If we were on Xero or QuickBooks, we're looking for a domestic reverse charge for income, and we will pick the appropriate rate, either 20 or 5%, and then you will end up with this narrative at the bottom of the screen, so it will collect this for you. So a few FAQs. I'm a subcontractor. Do I need to apply the VAT reverse charge even if I'm paid gross for CIS? The answer is yes. It doesn't matter if your CIS status is gross or net. For the purposes of this, if the conditions are met, then the reverse charge applies regardless of your CIS status. I'm a contractor. What if my subcontractor hasn't changed their invoices after the 1st of March? Can I just still pay them, or can I just pay them the net amount? The answer is no. They have to issue the invoices following the new VAT legislation. And so our suggestion is to send them out a template letter explaining the changes so they understand what's required, and also to let them know that if they don't issue the paperwork in the right format, it might result in delay of payment whilst they reissue the paperwork. You can't accept an invoice with a VAT amount showing and charged if they meet the criteria. What about mixed supplies? So from a CIS position, especially if you're net status, you'll understand that we split the invoices between labour and materials. That still applies in terms of CIS deductions, but regarding the VAT domestic reverse scheme, it applies to the whole invoice. So you just won't charge and collect VAT on the whole invoice, regardless of whether it's for labour or materials. This is intended to make the system a bit simpler, so one invoice follows the same rules across. You don't have a mix within the same invoice. This is a small change to the legislation, which I think isn't in the headlines, and so it's making sure that if you're a subcontractor, you're aware of. The introduction of the domestic reverse scheme means that you cannot use the cash accounting scheme for VAT. Now, this potentially is going to have a bigger impact on your cash flow than the actual domestic reverse charge itself. And so if you're a subcontractor and you currently use the cash accounting scheme for VAT, I would speak with your accountant as soon as possible to discuss the changes and the impact of this. And if you're not sure if you use the cash accounting scheme, again, I would confirm with your accountant so that you're aware and you're compliant from March. I'm a subcontractor. How can I check if my customer is VAT registered? There is no formal system for this. You can simply ask them to confirm to you if they're VAT registered. And this, like I said before, is something we've never had to do before. So it makes sense if you start that conversation now and with any new customers that you work with, so you know their VAT status. How can I check if a business is registered for CIS? Well, if you're already in the CIS system, then you're already in the process of checking for this. If you're a subcontractor, then you can verify the CIS status of a contractor by asking them for their UTR details and retaining copies of any documentation as evidence of this. So you're confirming that you're working for someone in the CIS scheme. And the subcontractors should already be using the CIS verification scheme when they take on subcontractors, so they should already know who works for them that is in the CIS scheme. What is quite likely is that if you, as a contractor, if you think about which subbies this might apply to, you're quite likely to know those that are on a net status for CIS because you're already in the habit of withholding CIS when you pay them. And it's easy to see which ones are VAT registered because there's VAT on their invoices. What you might not be quite so aware of is those subcontractors that are in the CIS system, but they are being paid gross status. So you're less aware perhaps that they are actually CIS registered. And you'll need to go through the process of looking at your subcontractors and rechecking which ones are in the CIS scheme to make sure you're aware that their invoices should have changed when they come through. Now, we've prepared 2 sample letters which can be sent either as a subcontractor up to your contractor or as a contractor down to your subbies to confirm the details that we've discussed on this presentation and to make sure that they're aware of the changes that are coming through. If you'd like copies of these letters, all you need to do is to email us at info@streetsweb.co.uk and we can send you copies of these letters if you just let us know which ones you would like. If you have any further questions on any of this, and very often the devil is in the detail with these changes to legislations. The headlines are often very easy to understand, but it's things like, do you qualify as an end user? Is the work you're providing definitely covered by the CIS scheme that you might want to confirm? The HMRC website, if you search for domestic reverse charge for the construction industry, the link shown on the screen here is excellent for giving you that extra bit of information. Or you can contact your usual Streets contact or email us at info@streetsweb.co.uk and we can look at it in more detail for you. I hope you found the presentation useful, and if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. Thank you.